I hope this message finds you well. I've been a long-time follower of your work, and have always found it fascinating. But never in my wildest dreams did I think that one day I would be writing to share an experience of my very own. My name is John, and for the sake of anonymity, let's just say I live in a rural area somewhere within the United States. My wife's family has owned land here for generations. They're farmers by trade, so we often visit them during holiday season, or whenever our busy schedules allow us some free time to run off out of the city. It's always a welcome change of pace, and we do enjoy the peace and quiet that comes with being surrounded in nature. However, this particular incident occurred during one such visit to my in-laws' house about 2 years ago in 2017. I remember it was late summer, early September, if my memory serves me right. The leaves had not started changing just yet, so it was probably September. The days were also still warm, and the nights had begun to cool down. We'd been there for almost a week already, spending our time catching up with family members who lived nearby or helping out on their farm as needed. On this evening, after dinner, it was probably closer to 9 p.m., I decided it would be a good idea to head into town to get some supplies that we needed. My wife stayed behind with her parents and siblings as they were planning a family game night, something of a tradition whenever we tried to get together. The drive from my in-laws' house to the nearest store was roughly 20 minutes each way, mostly dirt roads. It wound through dense forest, woods, and open fields. It wasn't uncommon to see deer or other various wildlife crossing these paths at dusk, like raccoons and possums for one. So I always tried to be a very cautious driver at night and keep an eye out. As I mentioned earlier, it was on my return trip when I encountered something that I still struggle to comprehend. The sun now had long since set, and the only source of real light came from my car's headlights as they cut through the darkness. I rounded a sharp bend in one of those dirt roads, about halfway back to my in-laws' house. I noted, at what appeared to be the first glance, a very unusually large dog, or wolf, on the side of the road up ahead. It was crouched down near a ditch, its head lowered, seemingly preoccupied with whatever it was eating. Curiosity piqued. However, cautious due to its size, I thought it was an extremely large coyote at the moment. I slowed down as I approached, worried that it would take off and run from the fear of my car in front of my car, and seeing as how I did not want to hit it, I slowed down. It wasn't until my headlights illuminated it fully that I realized this was not just a very large coyote. The first thing that struck me odd about its appearance was just how massive it truly was. It was at least 6 feet tall on all fours, and its fur was very matted. But what really unsettled me were its eyes. They were this orange color. It almost kind of glowed as it stared back at me, with this intensity I can't even begin to describe. As if sensing my presence, or perhaps startled by the sound of my car's engine. It had turned to face me directly, still grasping its meal in one of its massive paws. It was at this moment I realized this animal had hands, but not like a human's, more akin to those of an ape or maybe a raccoon, elongated fingers with sharp claws. Adrenaline coursed through my body, and my heart raced. Instinctively, I floored the gas pedal without even thinking. My car sped away from whatever monstrosity stood before me on that dark road. and all I could think about were those eyes burning into mine, as if they'd seared themselves onto my soul. I made it back to my in-laws in record time. I was pretty shaken up. I hesitated to share what had just transpired, although everybody could tell I was shaken up by something. I tried to write it off. I even casually asked if there was any large dogs or wolves in the area. My father-in-law dismissed it as nothing more than an overactive imagination, perhaps fueled by one too many scary stories. But deep down inside, even now after all this time has passed since that night years ago, I know that it was real. It wasn't just some figment of my imagination or a trick played by the shadows of the woods. And it was not a misidentification. Whatever it was clearly canine. It's just, its size was so off-putting. I would love to know your thoughts and opinions on the matter. I wanted to share with you an experience that has stayed with me for many years. After reading about similar encounters, I felt compelled to finally tell my story. Back in the autumn of 1986, when I was a young man living near the small town of Redfield in South Dakota, hunting had become one of my favorite pastimes. One weekend morning, during deer season, I found me driving along Willow Creek, a picturesque area surrounded by dense wilderness and marshlands teeming with all sorts of flora and fauna. Havit, my wife at the time, decided to join me on this particular hunting trip. She wasn't much of a hunter herself, but she really enjoyed spending time outdoors and taking in the beautiful scenery that our state had to offer. We set out early that morning, with high hopes for a successful day's hunt. We made our way down the highway, heading east towards Redfield, when something truly extraordinary happened. An event which would forever change how I viewed the wilderness, perhaps even life itself. As we approached an area where two highways intersected near Ashton, we decided to take a break and stretch our legs. The sun was now fully above the horizon, casting its warm golden light across the landscape as we parked our truck on a small dirt road. As my wife began unpacking some food from her backpack, I noticed that both she and our trusty Labrador retriever, named Duke, seemed uneasy. Their eyes kept darting back and forth towards an area west of us, near Willow Creek. At first, I dismissed them as simply being spooked. After all, this region is home to a large variety of things like coyotes and the occasional mountain lion. If you're not experienced in it, it can overcome you, mentally. I scanned the area with my binoculars in an attempt to identify what had caught their attention. Something truly inexplicable came into view. There, on the opposite side of Willow Creek, was a set of enormous footprints leading up from its banks towards dense woods beyond. Each print measuring approximately 14 inches long. Intrigued by this, but also somewhat unnerved, given that they were miles away from really any known human settlements or hiking trails, I investigated further. My wife, understandably concerned for our safety, she opted to stay behind with Duke while I ventured across the creek. I approached these tracks and began following them. It became increasingly apparent that they were not made by any animal native to this region, or at least none that we knew of. The stride between each print was enormous, far greater than what one would expect from a human or even a large bear. Moreover, there appeared to be no signs of claw marks as is typically seen in prints left by bears or big cats, such as mountain lions. Instead, The tracks appeared to have been made by a bipedal creature with an incredibly powerful stride. I continued following these prints deeper. My sense of unease grew stronger, as if something was watching me from just beyond my line of sight. The further I went, the more convinced I became that whatever had left those footprints must still be nearby, perhaps even observing me at this very moment. After what felt like hours, but in reality could not have been more than 20 minutes or so, it dawned on me now how foolish and reckless my actions had been. I was alone in a very unfamiliar part of the woods, tracking something that could be very, very dangerous, and all without any means to defend myself. As this realization set in, I decided I'd have to turn back now before venturing too far from where we parked our truck. However, just as I began retracing my steps towards Willow Creek, something caught my eye through the trees about 100 feet away. There stood what appeared at first glance to be a man covered head to toe with dark hair or fur. But upon a closer look, this was no man. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Its eyes were an eerie shade of red, kind of like a dim light filtering through them. It stared in my direction. It must have only been several seconds, but its gaze never wavered. It's like it stared into my soul. The creature let out a howl so loud and terrifying, it shook me. All the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. In that moment, I knew without a doubt that this was no ordinary animal, and certainly not one I wanted to encounter any further. I simply sprinted as fast as my legs would carry me towards Willow Creek, adrenaline coursing through every fiber of my being. As soon as I reached our truck, where my wife anxiously awaited with Duke by her side, we wasted no time leaving those woods behind us for good. And to this day, nearly 3 decades later since that morning near Redfield, I can't shake the feeling that whatever it was in those woods is still out there somewhere. My wife and I have since moved away from South Dakota to a far more urban area. However, every now and then when visiting family or friends who live near wooded areas, my mind can't help but wander back to that day, as if drawn by some inexplicable force towards an enigma which may never be fully understood. When I was 19, I used to go and visit my grandparents often. They lived in a rather small town. It was a pretty rural community. Lots of forest, lots of agriculture. You get the idea. On one of these visits, I decided to go for a walk one evening. It often got boring, and the sun had just begun to set. The sky was becoming full of stars, and I made my way down an old dirt road that I knew led to a small creek deep in the woods. I walked for quite a ways, deeper into the forest. Now, normally, the woods are brimming full of life. Bugs, birds, crickets, you get the idea. But this time, I noticed just how eerily quiet it had become. There were no sounds or cars or dogs barking, and even the usual sounds and chirping of crickets seemed to have completely ceased. I felt my skin, my entire body run cold, as if this feeling settled over me. Now, despite this, I continued walking until I reached a small clearing near a creek. The moonlight reflected off the water's surface. It did kind of cast an eerie shadow on the surrounding area. But the creek was so calming, and this is where I intended to relax for a while and just de-stem. I sat down on a nearby rock, and within a moment, I heard an odd crunching sound. It was coming from the other side, and a small clearing. Curiosity piqued, so I hopped over the creek, and I investigated as I cautiously made my way towards the source of the noise. There, behind a large oak tree, I approached. My eyes widened in shock at what lay before me. A small, furry creature, hunched over, eating something. At first, I thought it was a bear or maybe a small wolf or a coyote. But as my eyes adjusted to the dim light and I got closer, I realized this thing looked nothing like a bear or a wolf. It stood on 4 legs and had disproportionately long arms that ended in overly large claws. It appeared muscular, yet strangely and disproportionately elongated. Its fur, I could even tell in the dim light, streaked with various shades of brown and white. The head resembled a wolf, but with a very unnaturally elongated snout. I froze, but I observed the creature as it tore into its meal. It was eating a fawn, I believe, but hard to tell at the angle I was looking. Whatever it was must have been ravenous, as it snapped the bones apart effortlessly while using its hands, or claws-like hands. Its eyes suddenly turned and locked onto mine. They were a deep amber. The moonlight almost made them glow. It's like they pierced right through me. My heart sunk in my chest. It seemed curious, but didn't come off as aggressive. It's like it didn't mind that I was there. Before I could muster a thought, a twig snapped underfoot, or a tree branch shifted. Startled by a sound, I lost focus on the creature for just a moment. And when I looked back, it and the body it had been eating on had disappeared. I knew it was enough for me. I quickly gathered my bearings and sprinted the whole 3 miles back to my grandparents' house, not daring to look behind me, just in case anything was following me. Once I made it safely inside, I recounted my experience with them with trembling hands. They were skeptical at first, suggesting perhaps that I just misidentified a small bear or a coyote. They couldn't deny the genuine fear in my eyes. We spent the rest of the evening talking. My grandfather even humored me and began researching local legends, searching or help searching for any possible explanation. I'm here to tell you this wasn't a flipping bear or a wolf. I don't want to use the word werewolf, but that's kind of what it looked like. I never told my grandparents that, though. I've had a handful of sightings that I can't quite explain. They all took place on my grandfather's farm while growing up. I'm in my late 20s now, but these took place from the age of 9 to 15. My grandfather's farm was located in a rural area, surrounded by dense forests and rolling hills. It was the perfect setting for strange occurrences and unexplained sightings. The first sighting occurred when I was just 9 years of age. My cousin and I were playing near the edge of the forest, not too terribly far from the house. We were playing hide and seek, and it was my turn to find. I heard some rustling in the bushes nearby. Thinking it was my cousin, I crept closer, continuing our game. However, as I got closer, the rustling grew louder, and instantly I stopped in my tracks and stared. This black, hairy hand shot out from the bush and nearly tried to grab me. I screamed, and what emerged from the bushes was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It stood about 7 feet tall, very massive, very muscular. Its face resembled a man. Well, kind of, but they were yellow and large, and they almost seemed to glow. It stood on two legs like a human, but kind of had the hindquarters of an animal. It had a long tail that swayed slowly behind it. I froze. I was unable to move or even scream. It looked down at me, almost surprised at how small I was compared to it. I can vividly remember the expression on its face. It was wearing a frown. It turned and looked up, and walked off, just ever so casually. Once I was able to regain movement, I fled back to the house with tears streaming down my face, completely terrified out of my mind. I told my grandparents, which, by the way, they listened really good to me. And my grandfather tried his best to console me and to calm me down, and he listened to me. But he couldn't provide any explanation for what I had encountered. Over the years, I somehow gathered the courage to go back out there and play more, and I would not have another experience again till around 12 years old. I had a few more sightings. Each time, it was a similar creature, I think, because that first one was the only time I ever saw it up close. The other times, I'm pretty sure it would appear near the edge of the woods in a large field nearby, usually around dusk, and then vanish. When I was around 15, the most terrifying encounter occurred. It was late in the summer, and I decided to take a walk around the property before heading to bed. I approached the same open field that is surrounded by trees on all sides. This is a long-gone alfalfa field, and I say that jokingly. My grandfather used to grow alfalfa here for many years, but due to some medical conditions he faced, he just had to cut it out because he couldn't maintain it anymore. And now, it just sat as empty fields. And as I'm walking along, I get this feeling that there's eyes on me. And I turn in response, and I'm paralyzed. I could see this large, hulking figure, or what it appeared at the time was more like a shadow, making its way up to the tree line. The only light I saw were these amber glowing eyes coming from it. I was overcome with fear, and I could do nothing but stand there as it slowly approached. It stopped just feet away, its hot breath visible. For a moment, it seemed as if time stood still, and without warning, it let out this ear-piercing howl that echoed through the night, before continuing to move in the direction it was going, just further into the tree line. I used that opportunity to sprint back to the house, my heart pounding in my chest. At this time, my older cousin, the same one that I was playing with back when I was 9, well, he was a few years older than I, and he was not home. It was just me. I can tell you that afterwards, I stopped venturing out alone on the farm, especially after dark. As I look back, I don't know what this creature was, or why it seemed to be drawn to me. However, this encounter has left me with a deep respect for the unknown. Of course, it scared me out of my wits, but sometimes they really make you wonder, what if? I was living in a small rural town near Cape May, New Jersey, at this time. My friends and I often spent our evenings fishing for catfish down by Great Bear Lake, enjoying the serenity, peace, and quiet. One evening, as dusk began to settle in, my friend Mike and I decided to head out for some late-night fishing. We grabbed our gear, hopped into his truck with his dog, part wolf but well-trained, and drove towards one of our favorite spots along the lake's edge. As we arrived at our destination, just after sunset that night, something felt off immediately upon stepping out of the vehicle. It seemed unusually silent around us. No crickets chirping or birds singing like they usually would by this time of the day. Even more unsettling than usual silence was the strange vibes emanating from the surrounding woods, which made both me and my friend feel uneasy right away. Despite these ominous feelings, we proceeded to set up camp nearby a shoreline while keeping a very close eye on our surroundings, especially since neither had ever encountered anything particularly dangerous. It wasn't long until darkness fully enveloped the forest all around us, and suddenly we heard a loud crack coming from somewhere deep within the trees, followed shortly thereafter another similar sound echoing through the air. At first thought, maybe a branch simply snapped under weight of heavy winds blowing overhead. But then, we noticed how eerily still everything became outside, despite the absence of any breeze whatsoever. That's about the moment we realized whatever making those noises was definitely not a natural occurrence. Something big moving closer in our position, rapidly, without care, stealthily approaching. At that point, my friend's dog began to growl and bare its teeth in the direction of these strange noises. This was unusual behavior for him. He'd always been friendly and fearless, especially when we were out in these woods. As our unease continued to build with each passing minute, I decided it would be best if we grabbed a flashlight and my shotgun from the truck, just in case whatever was lurking nearby posed any real danger or threat towards us while fishing alone here by the lake. My friend agreed. We quickly retrieved the necessary items before cautiously making our way towards the source of the sounds. We moved deeper into the woods, guided only by our flashlight's beam cutting through the darkness. It became increasingly clear something was stalking us. The loud cracks continued to echo around us, almost as if taunting us to come closer. We could hear rustling nearby, and what sounded like a faint, low growling sound from just beyond where our light reached. After what felt like an eternity, we caught a glimpse of something. Standing there, on its hind legs, towering at least 8 feet, is, what I kid you not, appeared to be a massive, wolf-like creature with pointed ears and a long snout. Its eyes glowed an eerie reddish-orange in the darkness. We were both frozen as this animal stared us down, seemingly unafraid and unfazed by our presence, even more with the shotgun held tightly in my hands. It was at this moment that I realized we were dealing with something far beyond our understanding and experience. A creature, no, a being neither of us had ever even considered existing. Without warning, this thing let out an ear-piercing growl that shook us. It almost seemed to be daring us to make a move or try to escape its grasp. In response, I fired off a shot into the air in an attempt to scare it away. To our surprise and relief, it seemed to be momentarily startled and very quickly scurried back into the woodline. I have no idea if that thing was going to come back. Perhaps it was going to bring some friends, but we took that opportunity to make our way back to the campsite as quickly as possible, all while hearing horrible noises, growls, and movement through the trees, following us back the entire time. Once we reached our campsite, we threw everything in the truck and left the area for good. This has left us both shaken pretty deeply, and our views on that once peaceful area near Cape May will never be the same. In the early 2000s, I volunteered for the Forest Service for about 5 years' time. I've since worked on multiple operations, including but not limited to search and rescue. one particular summer evening in 2003. I can remember it like it was yesterday. I was out on a routine patrol with my partner, whom I'll call Dave. We were assigned to cover the eastern section of our designated forested area, which consisted mostly of thick, dense woods and some open fields. It had been a rather uneventful day so far, just checking for any signs of illegal activities or even potential hazards. Dusk approached, and we decided to take a break near one of the open fields before continuing our patrol into the night. The sun was setting behind us, casting a warm orange glow over the landscape, making it difficult to see clearly into the distance. So, we parked our vehicle near a small clearing and got out to stretch our legs. We were chatting about plans for the weekend. Dave suddenly stopped mid-sentence, pointing towards one of the tree lines bordering the field. "Do you see that?" he asked me in a hushed tone. I squinted my eyes against the fading light, but I couldn't make out anything unusual, at least at first glance. Dave insisted that he saw something moving in the shadows, so we decided to investigate further. We grabbed our flashlights and cautiously approached the tree line where Dave had spotted movement. As we crept closer, I began hearing sounds coming from the dense foliage. The hairs on my neck stood up as a very dreadful feeling washed over me. I noticed something else in that moment. It was eerily quiet, except for us and those subtle movements. Suddenly, a low-pitched growl emitted from the woods in the tree line, followed by what sounded like heavy footsteps. Dave and I exchanged nervous glances before shining our flashlights in the direction of the sounds. To our shock, we caught a glimpse of something we wish we would have never saw. What I can only describe to you as an enormous hairy creature on two legs standing near the edge of the woods. It appeared to be in dark fur that was very unkempt and dirty. Its ears were pointed, and it had a flat, sunken-in face. It kind of reminded me of a wolf, but it's almost like its face was beaten in. It's hard to explain. It's not like any wolf or canine I'd ever seen. It seemed to notice our presence instantly, and it locked eyes with us for what felt like forever. Without warning, it let out another low growl and began to advance towards us slowly, but confidently and deliberately. Panic set in, and we both knew we had to get back to our vehicle immediately. We really had no idea what we were dealing with here. We turned on our heels and sprinted through the field with adrenaline pumping through our veins. The sound of heavy footsteps followed closely behind us, and I could hear its growls growing louder and far more aggressive. As we reached our vehicle, Dave fumbled with the keys. I trained my flashlight on the tree line. The creature had stopped at the edge of the woods, but continued to snarl menacingly in our direction, as if it was plotting, strategizing how to get us without us knowing. Dave managed to unlock and start up our vehicle. We wasted no time speeding away. As we drove off into the safety, both of us were completely speechless. Once we were a safe distance away, Dave pulled over so that we could catch our breath and try to process what just happened. We both agreed after some time that we would not report the incident. We decided against it. Nobody would believe us. Or worse, our reputations would be in the gutter for making up such nonsense stories for attention. You know, even now, I still can't fully comprehend what exactly it was in those woods. I've heard similar accounts of what some people call a dogman or a wolfman. I can't help but wonder if that's what we saw. But the descriptions I've heard do vary from what we saw. Like I said, the being we saw, it almost had kind of a smashed-in face. Since then, I've tried to be more cautious and aware of venturing into the wilderness. It's definitely had a lasting impression on me. Something that I think is very interesting is that recently, after sharing my story with someone who spent a lot of time solo hiking, they shared their experience with me, and come to find out, it was very similar. They were hiking alone in a remote area of the forest, when they too suddenly felt an overwhelming sense of dread and unease. It happened after they traversed through a small path, a path which had a horrible odor, an odor that, upon reflecting back, wonder if it was part of its territory. They began to describe the feeling as though they were being hunted by something intelligent and predatory. They too also mentioned hearing strange roars and growls that sounded very humanistic in nature. They also managed to make it back safely, but they too were shaken and questioning what they had experienced. Listen, I know there are still many unknown creatures and phenomena in our world we have yet to fully understand or explain. While some may dismiss these encounters as mere folklore, misidentifications, or active imaginations, I can tell you from my personal experience that there is more out there than meets the eye, as a result of my own encounter with this mysterious entity. I've become more fascinated by cryptozoology and other unexplained mysteries. It's important for us to keep an open mind when it comes to such experiences, because dismissing them doesn't make them go away. So, let me tell you about this wild experience my buddy David and I had while we were investigating strange noises in a very remote forest. We like to consider ourselves cryptid hunters. We've always been very intrigued by this area. I guess supposedly there's a whole family of these creatures there. Anyway, one night in September, during a full moon, things got pretty intense. We were chilling at a spot we like to call Lookout Point. It's this tall hill where we can see pretty much everything around us. We had been hearing what we believe were a couple of Bigfoots. We can hear them moving through the leaves and occasionally making these banging noises and wood knocks from various locations. But after a while, it seemed their vibe changed. They seemed way more on edge. David heard something weird coming from the east and went to check it out. I stayed back at Lookout Point, just in case it was a distraction or a trap. He came back freaked out and told me he actually saw some of them sprinting out of the trees. What really freaked him out is that it appears they were being chased by what he described was a 7-foot-tall creature with pointy ears and a long snout chasing it. Neither of us had ever bought into the whole Dogman thing. We always thought those sightings were just misidentified Bigfoots or even bears. But after what David saw, I grabbed my 9mm and I headed to the truck. I loaded it up, and we decided to investigate a little further. We went to the spot where he supposedly saw this thing, and with our flashlights, we began looking around. We could still hear something big moving and growling nearby. Then, David caught a glimpse of it in between the trees. I couldn't believe my eyes. A 7-foot-tall wolf standing on its hind legs. I fired my gun into the air, and this thing took off. We decided to follow it, but it was clear this thing was not afraid of us. It felt like it was hunting us, just like it had been hunting those young Bigfoot that we had suspected had been in the area. As it came out of the trees, I took a shot at it, hitting it in the chest. I would later measure the distance. I saw the wound, so I know I hit it, but it got back up and kept moving. We were spooked, so we fled. We packed up and got out of there. We eventually came back to see if maybe it had died. Nothing. There was no blood trail. We followed where it went down into this canyon, and we found a huge canine paw print in the mud. It was like 12 inches across. We tracked it as far as we could, but we eventually lost the trail. Afterwards, we had reached out to a couple close friends of ours who believed we really had encountered a dogman. After that night, though, none of us really wanted to investigate it any further. My story begins in a small rural town where both sets of grandparents lived close by. As an only child, born in 1985, I was fortunate enough to spend ample quality time with them throughout my formative years, especially since they were always eager to have me around as much as possible. In the summer of 2003, when I was 18, my grandparents on my mother's side needed someone to watch over their property while they were away for a month's time. They owned a vast and beautiful ranch just nestled outside of Mariposa in California, and that town lays at the base of the foothills leading towards the Sierra Nevadas. This peaceful piece of land had always been one dearly loved by our family. Running along one end was an enchanting creek, populated with lush bamboo stalks stretching high into the sky. It almost seemed to transport you to another world. It was during their absence that I had one of the most remarkable and terrifying experiences of my life. One Friday evening, after finishing up some chores around the property, and I decided to venture out into Angel Slough with our family dog, Jasper, an intrepid German shepherd who rarely ever showed any signs of fear or hesitation. We walked through fields dotted with oak trees before arriving at the dense bamboo thicket surrounded by the limpid waters. We followed along its edge for about a half-mile straight towards what is known as Old Man's Crossing, a shallow area where locals have passed for years to reach neighboring ranches. The sky started turning into an orange palette as dusk settled. Jasper and I were just about halfway when we heard something crashing through the vegetation nearby. At first, it sounded like branches snapping underfoot, paired with faint huffing sounds that nearly resembled labored breathing or the grunting of some large animal. My initial thoughts were perhaps a bear again roamed these parts, since they occasionally frequented this region in search of food around harvest time, albeit quite unusual given our proximity to the houses throughout town. Jasper seemed uneasy, his ears pricked up and eyes fixed on a point in the dense foliage before us. As we both stared at where he was looking, my heart skipped a beat when I spotted this creature. What emerged from the bamboo thicket left me frozen with equal parts fear and awe. It stood around 4 feet tall, but appeared as if it might be hunched over slightly, like an animal preparing to charge or leap forward. Its skin had that odd gray-brown shade akin to old tree bark, almost blending into surroundings effortlessly. The being ran unnervingly fast on 2 legs, disappearing from sight and leaving only faint rustling sounds in its wake. The strangest aspect of it all was the way this moved, stooped low to the ground while running on long limbs with unnervingly large hands or paws stretched out before itself, almost reminiscent of a primate's gait. Both Jasper and I remained rooted at our spot for what felt like an eternity before rushing back home as quickly as possible after regaining some sense enough to move once more. In hindsight, that might be deemed foolish, considering we did not know where exactly Leary Thing had fled or if it was still lurking nearby. But at that moment, the overwhelming urge to escape had overpowered any rational thought. Now, upon returning home, I immediately barricaded myself inside and spent a sleepless night replaying events in my mind, attempting to just make sense what happened. The next day, armed with newfound courage, and Jasper by my side, we did revisit Old Man's Crossing, hoping evidence would reveal an explanation for our sighting. Sadly, only more questions ensued, as no trace could be found near where the creature appeared or vanished, other than some trampled bamboo stalks leading deeper into the thicket where it had emerged from. In hindsight, it seemed almost as if nature itself bent to accommodate and conceal its presence, overwhelmed with befuddling uncertainty about this bizarre happening. I hesitated sharing my experience with my loved ones or even the local police, fearing mockery or the imagination running wild. Tales of seeing extraterrestrial beings in rural areas have always been dismissed by skeptics, labeling us as crackpots seeking attention from others like ourselves who believe such foolish phenomena exist. Well, I'm here to tell you, most people can't comprehend what they would witness to be true. Even after years of pondering retrospectively over this encounter, it has remained in my mind, permanently etched in my memory. I cannot shake the feeling it was something genuinely beyond our known reality. Ever since I was a little girl, my parents loved taking long drives and exploring obscure destinations all throughout the United States. From historical sites to hidden gems in dense, unknown forests, they were always on the lookout for new adventures. Not surprisingly, then, that once I grew up, while pursuing landscape architecture as my profession, wandering off the beaten path became second nature than just leisure activity. Last weekend turned out to be one such eventful episode from these many travels, exclusively memorable because of what happened there. It so transpired that we decided to travel northwards along eastern Hudson River Valley. We had heard stories about the area being rich in nature and history, so naturally, we couldn't wait to see what it held. We decided to stay at a cozy little bed and breakfast tucked away amidst tall trees for our weekend adventure getaway. Our goal was to hike through nearby trails during daytime while soaking up some local culture and visiting quaint townships close by when nightfall swept over us. On Saturday evening, after an enjoyable time exploring Hollow Brook Trailhead, my husband, Paul, who is also passionate about photography, managed capturing wild deer, numerous birds, and the greenery-filled landscapes at its picturesque best. We returned to our accommodation, tired but satisfied, with what had been an amazing day. After a pleasant meal from our host that night, Paul suggested visiting Wappinger Creek Bridge, an old abandoned trail near a college, early next morning before heading home. The next day dawned bright, without even the slightest indication of having coffee jitters. Everything seemed just so perfect. We drove up to the parking area not far away from campus. As the sun's first rays began dispersing, darkness around us gradually turning into shadows. Armed with our cameras and high spirits, we embarked upon the path which led to the creek bridge, or whatever remained of it after years of unkempt abandonment. As we neared closer towards the dilapidated iron bridge that had definitely seen better days in its prime, rusted beams overgrown beneath choking foliage, twisted reinforcement exposing decay within, rather than brave resistance fighting time's ravages. Somehow, this sense grew stronger about some unseen presence watching us intently from afar throughout the entire hike until now. It felt unsettling, but neither one dared admitting something didn't add up about this place. As we cautiously stepped onto the bridge, an unsettling silence seemed to envelop us. We began snapping away pictures of anything that caught our eye, and it was at that moment when things went off kilter. A sudden chilling gust blew across us from seemingly nowhere, catching both by surprise. Paul's wide-brimmed hat, which protected him against sunlight, took flight while my scarf clung tightly around my throat, quivering with every intense draft, wreaking havoc upon its delicate fabric folds, before finally settling back down where it once belonged, albeit tangled messily in aftermath left behind by an invisible intruder who had just invaded our otherwise peaceful surroundings. It was then we realized, eyes locked on each other in that eerie quietness. Something far more sinister looked nearby. A sudden movement at the edge of my peripheral vision revealed what seemed like two slender figures emerging from abandoned structures adjacent to the bridge. Their appearance resonated with descriptions associated with fabled chupacabra. Our hearts raced as these beings darted towards us rapidly, long limbs extending out almost similar to an octopus's appendages. Just as we're about to scream, panic-stricken and unsure of what would happen next, something miraculous occurred. The first rays of morning sun breached the foliage canopy above us, casting its warm glow directly onto these bizarre creatures that had now reached striking distance from our trembling forms. Yet, within seconds, they vanished right before our disbelieving eyes. It appeared that sunlight somehow vanquished their very essence. Paul and I, clutching each other tightly in shock at what we had just witnessed, were it not for a timely intervention from the sun's reassuring presence shining down upon us, wondered how this seemingly innocent hike could have escalated so violently. Were these famed cryptids stalking our every move? What drew them to humanity? As if it's still reeling under the stupor induced by such an inexplicable encounter, we made haste in gathering belongings which lay scattered carelessly where previously abandoned due to fear. As if still reeling under stupor induced by such an inexplicable encounter, and with that, we scrambled back to our car and drove away. The soon-to-be-forgotten memories of the creek bridge dissolved. Warmest regards, Claire and Paul. I think I encountered a skinwalker. It all began back in 1996, when my family moved to Alberta, Canada, from Ontario. It was for my dad's new job opportunity. We were excited about the move, and looking forward to experiencing life on the prairies. Our house was an older one, just outside of town near a quiet wooded area, with our closest neighbors being several kilometers away down dirt roads traversing vast expanses of Canadian wilderness. Perfect territory for something strange or even otherworldly. On one overcast autumn day during the first year, both my parents went shopping, leaving me, then 14 years old at the time, alone to entertain myself. Bored, I decided to go exploring the woods behind our house, with my trusty slingshot and pocket knife, typical accessories for a teenage boy in that time. As I ventured further into the thick forest land than ever before, there was an eeriness present. Something felt off, but curiosity got the best of me, as it does most teenagers my age. Unperturbed by this unsettling atmosphere, I pressed on, enjoying nature's quiet beauty, when suddenly, from afar, through what seemed like kilometers away, came a strange growl echoing throughout those once peaceful surroundings. It caught my attention immediately. I cautiously followed the sound, attempting to pinpoint its origin. The further I ventured in that direction, the more that it felt like someone or something was watching me. My heart raced as a mixture of fear and excitement coursed through my veins. Finally, I reached a small clearing in the woods where sunlight streamed down upon wildflowers dancing gently in the breeze. There stood an old, dilapidated barn, perhaps once used by farmers who had long since abandoned this area for greener pastures elsewhere. Approaching closer with bated breath while clutching my slingshot tightly, I peered around the corner of the barn to find the source. What I saw was what appeared to be a coyote, standing on two legs like a human, but with unmistakable dark features. An over-exaggerated, elongated snout, piercing yellow eyes that were almost human, and a twitch, ever so slightly, at my presence. It looked at me with intensity, as if trying to read every thought or emotion within. An experience I will never forget. The fear inside me turned into pure terror when this skinwalker, as I later came to believe it was, began to approach me with a menacing gait, almost as if it was summoning me here, like it expected me. It emitted another growl that was guttural, but this one seemed more communicative than it did a taunt. Regardless, it still made my spine quiver, and instinctively, I tightened my grip on the slingshot. In a flash, in a desperate attempt to defend myself for whatever it had planned, I quickly aimed for its eye and released a projectile from my slingshot with all the strength I could muster in the blink of an eye. It connected with one of those yellow orbs, momentarily disorienting this terrifying being long enough for me to make an escape back towards our house through the dense woods. My heart was pounding out of my chest as I sprinted with everything I had. I could feel the creature's presence everywhere and close. I heard what was an unmistakable howl of anger that I had gotten away. It echoed throughout the trees, filling my entire makeup with dread. It seemed like it took an eternity, but I finally reached our backyard, bursting through the door of our house, slamming it shut behind me. I collapsed on the floor, completely exhausted from fear and adrenaline. It took me a while to catch my breath. I quickly locked every door and window before retreating to my room. I spent hours sitting there in silence, struggling to shake off what had just transpired. My parents would later return home, and I was very hesitant to share the experience, fearing they would mock me. They wouldn't believe me, or simply brush it off as nothing, an overactive imagination. Eventually, I mustered up the courage and recounted what had happened in the woods that day. To my surprise and relief, they took me very seriously. My father even admitted that he too had heard strange stories from locals about unexplainable occurrences within this same area. Whispers of shape-shifting creatures haunting the lands for centuries, but Of course, just thought they were folklore. In the years since this encounter, I have learned more about skinwalkers and their place in Native American folklore. I have learned that folklore isn't so much folklore, that there seems to be truth in a lot of it. Although my encounter was brief and terrifying, it has now sparked a lifelong interest in the unexplained and the supernatural world that surrounds us. Thank you for taking the time to hear me.